AC, this is a bit of a weird one. I mean, it's not a Hammerland episode. It's not Academia Giallo. We're just back talking about a horror movie, but not exactly just for the sake of talking horror movies. It's because it's October. It's
Yep.
late October,
Yep.
but it's also Scare-a-Thon time. We haven't done one of these in, well, a year. So today we're going to be talking about Larry Cohen's It's Alive from 1974. So it's the 50th anniversary of a film that I had not seen until this morning. Nothing new here, but it's weird that I hadn't seen this one in particular, and we'll get to the reasons why later. But
Oh,
first of all,
there's reasons.
how you doing? Oh yeah, okay, we got a good angle there now.
No, I
All
like
right.
I like that I like that you have reasons for having not seen it, other than just having not gotten around to it, because that's usually how it goes, is that we just haven't gotten around to things. But there's a reason. I'm excited. You've piqued my interest.
There is no reason I should not have seen it. I should have seen this, and there's a reason that I'll get to in a little bit. Yes.
Oh, okay. Like I said,
yes.
But I know you're a Larry Cohen fan.
Yes, but much like the Cohen brothers, different spelling, he's one of those filmmakers, or he was, who's tells very different kinds of stories. It's kind of hard to pin down like, oh, that was a Larry Cohen movie. That was Larry Cohen movie. Oh my God, that was much like the Cohen brothers, who work in all different kinds of genres.
Yep.
But before we get into all of that, tell us about Scare-a-Thon. What is it for those who are new initiates who have not been following this channel or Horror 101 with Dr. AC for the last several years?
Right.
And tell us what you're supporting this year. Or
Thank you. Yes. Well, for those who have been paying attention, Ian and I have been, we've been doing these both on audio only, and then we started doing the video stuff in 2020. And basically what we're doing is we raise money for charity by watching movies in October, from, beginning to end. And back in the day, I used to have people pledge per movie because I had a lot more time on my hands. And so I would watch, 50, 60, 70, 100 movies in the spirit of a walk-a-thon or a read-a-thon, and people would pledge per. And then, once life got a little more bonkers, I started just doing a regular 31 movies over the course of the month. And people pledge however much money they would like. And this year, for the third consecutive year, we are benefiting the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project, aka WRAP. And you can go to their website. You can also find any of the videos we've done over the course of the month over at Horror 101. You can find that link to donate in the description of those videos. And I expect you'll have a description or a link below in the description of this video. So if you're listening right now, you could probably just look down at that video description, and you could click on that link, and we'll still keep talking while you're donating. You won't even have to pause at all.
Very much so. So yes, please, if you feel so moved, check all that out and donate for sure. So it's appropriate. I mean, we're talking about It's Alive.
Yeah.
It's a movie. It's a horror movie that when I was young, I would go into the video store and I would see that famous image. You got the box set right there.
Yes, I do.
You can hold it up because it was the cover of the VHS.
Yep.
Yeah, the bassinet with the little creepy hand, claw hand hanging down. I was like, what is that movie about? But of course, I was too young to rent those kinds of movies then. But for whatever reason, I just never caught up with it until today. It was the perfect occasion to talk about this movie. And I'm kind of glad I didn't see it when I was younger, because I think I would have been bored out of my mind.
I was thinking about you and younger Ian. I'm like, I wonder how this would have sat.
Like a lead balloon. And that's not to say that I don't like the movie or appreciate it. I really dig what Larry Cohen was doing. He wrote, directed, and produced the film, but it's such an adult horror movie that deals with, the psychological terror of parenthood and, a lot of different things that I'm sure we'll get into, that I was surprised at how little, violence, gore there is throughout the movie. I mean, it ramps up at the end, but this is, again, I think I would have rented it, gotten like, a half hour in and been like, where's the old demon baby? I don't know what's going on here.
Well, it does kick off with quite a hospital slaughter scene,
Sure.
And I think that's Larry Cohen and his exploitation sensibilities going, if I give him a big splash at the beginning, they're going to be like, oh, well, that was the beginning. I mean, what's going to come next? And what comes next, as you say, is a lot of kind of hiding in corners and human drama. As we have our parents, the basic setup is we have the Davises, Frank and Lenore, and Lenore is pregnant and she's taken to the hospital to give birth to her baby. And behind closed doors, basically the entire delivery team is just slaughtered while Lenore is in restraints in the I'm like, I don't know if that's how they used to do it. I hope that's not how they do it anymore. But having never been in a delivery room myself, but the baby, the mutant baby, as we come to find out, has escaped and is out in the world and trying to find its way home.
Well, and I want to correct the record a bit because the movie doesn't really lead off with that. It is early on, but there's a whole like 10 plus minutes of this
of them going to the hospital.
Right. But even that, I was, surprised at how specific and how sweet this kind of family interaction is. Usually with the, in a horror movie with the mom about to give birth, something's going to happen. Usually that's right off that, like, oh, I know something's wrong, or get this thing out of me, or whatever. Right. But it was, having, been through this a couple of times and having vivid memories of my own dad when my younger brother, who's, 11 years younger than me. In fact, I was just about the same age as the older brother in this movie, because the family has a son who's in 6th grade or something.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly my dad having that kind of like, oh, it's time to get mom to the hospital and you got to go stay with the neighbors. It was like having flashbacks watching this, but it's so sweet. And again, specific. It's not there's nothing generic. It very much is an observed kind of reality in this film, which I think gets us into the mindset of these characters who are very much excited about having kid number 2. They love each other. They love their son. And they're very much anticipating bringing this new life home. So when it turns out to be this mutant monster, as you put it, who goes on a killing spree across town, and there's all this publicity around it, Frank, the dad, works as a PR person and he gets low key fired from his job. And Lenore starts going through these kind of her own kind of trauma at home, but Frank is so focused on what do people think, or what will people think of me and my family and my son and all this other stuff, that everyone kind of goes off into their own corners and the family unit is fractured, which leads into other interests who want to get a hold of this baby and study it and or kill it because it may have been the result of something that they've done, which we'll get into soon. Yeah. But I was surprised at the layers and the complexity of this story. It's not just this, random slasher where there are a couple of kind of spectacular kills, but the baby, I think total in this hour-and-a-half movie, he's rampaging for like, I feel like maybe 15 minutes, if that.
Yeah. Yeah, we see a lot of aftermath, and but we don't see there. You're right. There's not a lot of like baby monster action.
So tell me, my first time watching this was today. Yeah. How did you first encounter It's Alive, and how did you react to it? Were you young when you saw it? Were you older and you're like, oh, I can appreciate this as an adult horror movie?
So I recommend everybody pull up the trailer for It's Alive, because it was one of the great ad campaigns. I remember it distinctly in the way that I remember the Magic trailer with Fats the dummy, because you get the slow creep in on a bassinet and you're kind of panning around it. And they're talking about, the joys of childbirth and, bringing new life into the world. And then the tagline was, there's only one thing wrong with the Davis baby. It's alive. And I just remember, like, because this was probably the re-release in like 76 or 77 is when this came out. And so I was probably, 8 or 9 years old. And I was like, holy crap, that's so good. Like, even then I was like, that's a great stinger. But it just, the mystery, because you kind of saw like a little claw hand, like sticking out of the bassinet. And you're like, well, that ain't right. And, but I didn't see it until probably in my teens. But even then, I think Cohen is a smart low budget filmmaker in that he gives you the set pieces, but then it's a lot of just kind of keeping things in the shadows and keeping you intrigued with the human drama and the pursuit. You want to see the monster. Well, guess what? So do the cops, so do the scientists, so does mom and dad. They want to see the monster. So you're tracking along with them. And I think that's why it works both as a monster movie and as the allegories, you know, that you were kind of referring to, the adult themes that we're talking about of identity and, you know, the trauma of being a parent and what that does to you and your life. But I mean, I think so watching it, I've always liked this movie, and I always like it in a different way each time I revisit it. I think this is probably like the fourth or fifth time I've seen it. And watching it this morning, I was like, my thought was, wow, there's not as much monster action as I remember. And you don't get to see the creature as clearly as, because, you know, it's right there on the box. And I remember seeing that in like tons of reference books and magazines and things like that. Like the It's Alive baby was a thing, and you could instantly recognize it. And in the movie, you barely get to see it. Like you really rarely get like a nice clear shot of it. Now that changes in the sequels, It's Alive 2 and Island of the Alive. You absolutely, they are front and center. But for this one, he does the smart thing of kind of keeping it in the shadows. And it was designed by Rick Baker, who was certainly early in his career. And that was kind of the deal that Baker made with Cohen, is that do not show this thing too much, because he'd already been burned when he did the film Octoman, which was one of Baker's first films, where, you know, he put together this Octoman thing, and they had said, yeah, we're going to keep him in the shadows. They did not keep it in the shadows. They like put it front and center, broad daylight. And he's like, oh my God, that looks like crap. Nobody's ever going to hire me again. And so Baker was very clear. He's like, this is not for, you know, not for close study, but I think it'll do the trick. And I think it does do the trick.
It very much does so. And it's weird because I kept thinking about other movies. I'm like, oh, this is kind of the Jaws approach. Like he got this approach from Jaws where you don't show the creature. And I'm like, no, Jaws came out the year
That's
after
right.
this.
That's right.
So I'm not saying Spielberg watched It's Alive and thought this is genius, but it is, you can kind of see that strategy. I also thought of, you know, Alien, which came out 5 years after this. It's very much the same kind of thing. There's a birth sequence, and then there's people kind of tracking this thing into these shadowy rooms, and it lunges out. You don't see it very much until towards the end. So yeah, I'm not saying that anybody's, you know, cribbing from this movie, but it's cool to see these kind of connective tissues. Like I want to sit down and watch movies where you don't see the monster, but you get the full effect of its effect on the people looking for it. You know, if there is such a genre or a film class. I was instantly reminded of Bat Boy from the National Enquirer when you do finally see him. And also, you know, take a shot, everybody. Jason Voorhees, the Tom Savini effect from the first Friday the 13th, where he had the kind of the bulbous head, what you see of him in the lake. It's like if you took that and attached really awkward, huge vampire fangs to it for some reason. I don't know what's going on with this creature, except it's alluded to that one of the drug company that manufactured one of the drugs that Miss Davis was taking throughout her pregnancy, is that what we're led to believe may have led to these birth defects?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Which is very interesting, because at once they want to cover it up, they kind of deploy one of the people, I guess, who's associated with the Davis family to capture it or kill it, but make sure that it's you know, intact enough that they can do research on it. But definitely want it dead. They don't want this thing captured and, you know, a national media sensation like, hey, let's find out where this thing came from. They want to know what happened, but they don't want the trail leading back to them, which leads to one of the coolest climaxes I think I've seen in any movie. We'll get to that in a minute. But you know, as far as you know, the performances in here, I think are the real selling point. You know, it's John P. Ryan, who's I'll call him a character actor. I've seen him pop up in kind of miscellaneous things here, but he really is the centerpiece of this movie. You know, Lenore, played by Sharon Farrell, she kind of takes a back seat to Frank because this is sort of his movie, but she is also sort of his saving grace in terms of being redeemed at the end, which I thought was very interesting because he goes from being the proud, loving dad before the birth to, oh my God, what is this thing? And it's killing people. What do people think of me? To that's not my baby. I have nothing to do with that thing. To I'm looking it in the eyes and I recognize something of myself in it and I want to protect it at all costs until it becomes impossible to protect it. And okay, I'm going to strike back at the forces that conspired to make this in the biggest FU possibly in cinema history. I exaggerate, of course.
No, wow.
It's a great, it's like an arc and a half in this movie.
I'd forgotten the ending. I forgot how it ends. And I was like, oh, that's right. Oh my gosh. Like I really love, I love how that is handled, even though, I mean, again, he's left with almost no choice at that point. And so this really is his best bad option. What I was going through this time is that I had read a piece of trivia that what John P. Ryan is holding in his arms is actually a puppy. And so when it's wriggling around, that's real. Is that the puppy is like wriggling around. And I'm like, that's so cool. He's got a puppy. And then of course, you know, what happens. And I went, oh, yeah, it caught me off guard there. Nice job.
Well, we can talk a little bit of spoilers because the movie is now officially a half century old. My goodness. True. Movies from the 70s are half 100.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but you know, it's when he has this kind of change of heart, he's down in the sewers, you know, with the police. He's been given a shotgun and he kind of goes off on his own. He discovers, you know, the child, the monster. And he decides, you know, I'm not going to hurt you. I can't do this to you. So he gathers it up in a trench coat. And we're talking about a low budget film. Wow, what a great way to stretch your budget. That I'm going to call it an iconic shot of him running from a police car that's driving through the sewers, and he's like ankle deep in, you know, God knows what, trying to escape. Yeah. And then he comes out, he thinks he's escaped, but he comes out of this tunnel and there's, you know, 50 cops and the guy from who's the agent of the drug company who just wants to get his board position. And then you've got the one cop, Lieutenant Perkins, which is the one time where I will allow a cheesy horror movie reference in naming of characters because it works here. But yeah, it's like, Frank, drop the kid or drop the monster. There's nowhere to go. You're cornered. The one trigger happy cop who's upset that this thing has murdered a couple of his compatriots is like, I don't give a shit. I'm going to blow both of you away. So Frank does the tragic, noble thing, realizing in that moment, I think, that there's no way out. They're going to take his baby and either kill it or lock it up and experiment on it and then kill it. So what does he do? He says, all right, here, I'm going to take this and throw it at drug company representative. It's going to maul him to death while all the cops blow both of them to smithereens, which is exactly what happens. It's beautiful.
Yep. Well, fun little fact. I was reading about the film, and apparently Larry Cohen wanted to get Anthony Perkins and Janet Leigh to play the parents and have a little Psycho reunion for, yeah. So that's how the Perkins reference got in there. It's like, well, I can't cast Anthony Perkins, so I'll name one of my characters Perkins.
Can I visit the alternate universe where that happens? Because to see them playing a married couple after everything we know about them, and only 14 years later, yeah, wow.
So John Ryan is somebody, like you say, he does appear in quite a few films. I think he's done close to 100 credits, TV and film. But I knew him, in addition to this film, I know him best from the 1985 film with John Voight and Eric Roberts, Runaway Train. He plays the cop who is dead set, or he's the warden who's dead set on recapturing his prisoners who have escaped. And it's basically, you know, it's a 4-person drama for the most part. It's John Ryan chasing down the 2 fugitives, and then they run into Rebecca De Mornay on the runaway train. And he is fantastic in that. And but he also started off early on in his career with Bob Raffleson with Five Easy Pieces and King of Marvin Gardens. So, and he also did Seamus with Burt Reynolds and Diane Cannon. So he was having a good time in the early 70s, and it was nice to see him in a lead role. And I think he does bring a lot of nuance, and it's a very complex character, Frank Davis.
It is, and I like the complex relationships. I mean, when he's driving home from the hospital on that night of hell, he turns on the radio, and already his family name is in the press. I don't know that I've seen that. I don't know if there have been laws passed or something in terms of releasing that information, but it's like the Davis family at living,
Right.
13 Park Tree Lane has a little monster that's on the loose. But he goes into work, at his PR firm, and he's trying to go about his business as usual. And his secretary is like, yeah, the boss wants to see you. He goes in and sits down. And the guy's like, look, you got 3 weeks of vacation. Why don't you just take it now? And he's like, but I got these 2 accounts I'm working on. I was like, you should probably take that vacation. And as he leaves, the big boss brings in his secretary. They close the door. He's like, yeah, clear out his desk. He's done.
Yeah.
It's so cold.
And that big boss is played by Guy Stockwell, who is Dean Stockwell's brother. But fans of alternate cinema may recognize him from Santa Sangre from 1989, the Jodorowsky film.
Yeah.
Yep. He plays Orgo, the leader of the circus. Clearly, many years later and several pounds heavier, but he still has that same level of charisma and little villainy coursing underneath it.
And that's the thing, is he is the perfect, I think, corporate villain, because he gives no indication to the guy that he's going to sack that anything is right. He plays his friend. They've probably been working together a long time. There's definitely respect there, but he's like, yeah, I can't. He makes that joke, and I cringed when I heard it. He's like, maybe you could use a good PR firm to help you out of this situation. Like,
oh man, yeah, it was dark.
So brutal. Briefly, I want to sidestep to the mystery we talked about earlier. It's completely self-serving. The reason I should have seen It's Alive a long time ago is because I actually interviewed Larry Cohen.
Right.
It was in the context of him showing, I believe, the stuff at the patio or the Portage. I always get those theaters mixed up here in Chicago. Probably, gosh, like 10 years ago, maybe. But I didn't do nearly as much homework as I should have, because I think it was afterwards that I realized. I think it was when I watched the documentary about him, King Cohen, which is excellent. I talked to the director of that film. I'm like, wow, he's done way more things than I have seen, and several things I should have been aware of, but was not. So in those situations, I don't so much regret my decisions as I cherish the fact that I wasn't a super fan at that point, because it prevents a lot of drooling. Because I probably would have spent the entire time asking about It's Alive and not so much the stuff. Another movie that I happen to appreciate up until the weird monster yogurt thing at the end. That effect just does not work.
Well, and this was, I'm glad you talked about King Cohen, because I think that's a fantastic documentary. And this, in Cohen's career, this was after he'd done 3 blaxploitation films with Fred Williamson. Well, actually, two with Fred Williamson and 1 with Yaphet Kotto. Bone, Hell Up in Harlem, and a title that I won't say in polite company. But then this was his next move, was to do a monster movie. And what was interesting was that when it was first released, Warner Brothers wanted nothing to do with it, which is interesting because they were just coming off of The Exorcist. So you would have thought they would have realized that, hey, horror is big business. Let's push this thing. But it really didn't do well. Where it did do well was in the foreign markets. So like it was the #2 film of all time in Singapore, and it just started like having a lot of success overseas. And then suddenly there was a clearing of the Warner clearing house at Warner Brothers, and a bunch of new executives came in, and they went, and Larry said, will you please take a look at the film? And they looked and they went, we like this. What? Oh, wait, it's been doing really great overseas. And so they had a re-release, which is unheard of. they re-released it in 76, 77 with a big ad campaign, the one I was referencing earlier, and it did huge business. I think it was #1 at the box office, lines around the block, and it was a monster hit. But that was almost not its fate.
That is really surprising to me. I mean, I guess in the context of The Exorcist, sure, but like this doesn't. I think It's Alive is a pretty excellent film for what it is, but I don't see this as a lines around the block movie.
Well, I think this is where the campaign came in. Like people were like they went and saw it because the trailer was so enticing.
Right, but what I'm thinking is when I think lines around the block, I think Star Wars, where it's like weeks and months of like you got to see this. I can imagine lines around the block for like Friday afternoon, and then come Saturday afternoon, it's like, yeah. But it was the 1970s after all.
Sure.
Tell me about these sequels, because it does have, again, I think one of the perfect sequel openings of all time. You've got the Davises in the backseat of the cop car. You've got Lieutenant Perkins gets radioed in. You've got to call him the private line. He picks up the phone and then he says, another one's been born in Seattle, and they drive off into the night.
Yep.
Awesome. But
and
a sequel?
Well, my wife actually was like, was this so that they could do a sequel? And I went, there was a time when sequels weren't the de facto. Like just because you had a successful film didn't mean that there was absolutely going to be a follow-up. And I kind of long for the days of you could have an ending that was like, and the evil continues, and then just kind of let your imagination fill in the blanks, as opposed to being like, okay, well, I guess we'll wait a year or two and then there'll be another movie. It becomes very kind of episodic in that regard. But yes, because Warner Brothers made so much money, they were like, hey, Larry, you want to do a sequel? And Larry went, sure. If you'll give me money, I'll absolutely do a sequel. So it follows, I forget who are actors. I know Frederick Forrest plays the father, and I can't remember who plays the mother. But Frank goes and connects with this couple in Seattle who is giving birth to another. And it's kind of more of the same. It's like baby monster rampage. I haven't seen it in a while, so I'm not really clear on details, but I remember it being pretty much more of the same. When you get to part 3, which I believe was 87, it's it's called Island of the Alive. That's the subtitle. Yeah. And basically they have set up an island where these monsters can breed and and basically just have an island all to themselves while they study them. Michael Moriarty, who was a Larry Cohen fave, and Karen Black are in it together. And wow. The babies are presented via stop motion animation. So we get to see a lot of baby action. They're also much bigger, so we get to see giant baby action. So yeah, I mean, they're weird and wild. I don't think they have, they certainly the third one is certainly cut from a different cloth. It's much more kind of comic in tone and kind of absurdist, especially with Moriarty on hand. So, I think it's one of those where it starts off being one thing and it becomes something else by the third.
It sounds like you're recommending Island of the Alive. Is that true?
With the expectation that it's not going to be the same movie. And It's Alive 2. I mean, again, if you like the first one, you'll probably like the second one, as long as you realize it's just more of the same. It's not really breaking any new ground. Island of the Alive is absolutely breaking new ground, whether it hits your particular vibe or not. Your mileage may vary.
I could just, first of all, I like the idea of the sequel, like It's Alive. Tell me that the logo is 2 like Roman numeral I's for
as well.
It's, yeah.
No, I think it's a big 2.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
You just reminded me of the Mad Magazine parodies where they would do like Rocky 2 and be Rocky TOO. Oh man! But wait, there's 3 bassinets,
and this time that's the tagline. Now there are 3 of them.
That sounds like the parody. It's alive too. There's 3 of them. What?
Because why? Yeah, wait, what? That doesn't make any sense. That math doesn't work.
Mm,
I do want to do a quick plug for Shout Factory's release of this trilogy. All 3 have audio commentary from Larry Cohen, and there's also a 20-minute featurette interviewing Cohen and our various players. I don't think we get any of the major players. I don't think we get any of we have, actually, it's more critics and people talking. Oh, we haven't mentioned Bernard Herrmann's score yet, which we should absolutely do. I found it very reminiscent of his score for Sisters for Brian De Palma, which came out the previous year.
Was this also just Larry Cohen trying to collect, because he was just fanboying out about Psycho the entire time? Is that what he was doing? Wow.
I mean, I love the fact that Bernard Herrmann, like, was taking a chance on these young filmmakers. I mean, like, Brian De Palma wasn't really anybody big in '73, and Larry Cohen certainly was not a big name. I don't know if he ever became a big name by Hollywood standards.
Probably not. And I feel like that's why King Cohen was such an important documentary, showing like you haven't seen this guy's name up, with Tom Cruise or anything, but you have seen his movies and you've loved them, even if you don't know who made them.
Well, and I think it really quick. I mean, on that note, I mean, he directed, I think, like 20 movies, but he's responsible for the screenplays of like 80. He was a much more prolific screenwriter. And so that may also be where, if you're familiar with his name, you might have seen it pop up on, any number of movies like Phone Booth. What else did he do? He also wasn't strictly a horror guy either. Like he wrote for all kinds of genres.
Yeah. And I did not, well, hold on a second. I'm going to do the thing that I hate, because
do that thing.
Going back to my Coen brothers thing, I have not looked up to see just like all of the random stuff that he's done. Yes, it lives again. The Ambulance. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Maniac Cop, is that right?
Yep.
Wow, that's right. Uncle Sam, the Tourist. Oh, Cellular. I did see that movie.
Yep.
Captivity. Wow, he was working like all the way up until the end, it seems. So that's really inspiring. One thing I got to ask you, AC, because I thought about this, Frank's noble and tragic act at the end of throwing this monster baby at his enemy and having the monster baby devour the guy's throat, knowing that they would both be killed.
Mm-hmm.
Yet he and his wife just kind of get the cop escort back home, we're led to believe. Could he be charged with something? Is that like murder or manslaughter or something?
I mean, they did put him in a pretty precarious situation there. He could have put the weapon down, but he didn't put the weapon down. So yeah, I'm not sure. I think he probably could and maybe should be held liable. I think also the cops, like, man, thank God that's over. I don't actually want to do the paperwork on this. Why don't we just all go home?
They're like, wait, what guy, what baby?
He also has one of my favorite lines where he's like, hunting down these mutant babies just isn't my thing, or isn't my gift. Not very good at tracking down these mutant babies.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. I'm trying. Oh yeah, they had the head of the pharmaceutical company is in one scene where he's kind of like recruiting the guy to go do his dirty work, and he's saying he wants the absolute destruction of the thing. He's so cool and calm about it. You just wonder. I'm getting Alien vibes. Now that came out 5 years later, but there is like this kind of a Weyland-Yutani thing. Like, there's part of me that wonders, especially because there are more of them popping up, but not so many that it's like an epidemic of mutants. But could this have been something that was intentional? Like, hey, we're going to experiment on people, because by the time it gets to the point where you're productizing it and women are injecting themselves or they're getting these treatments, you got to know that something's hinky with this. So
you would hope, right? One person we haven't talked about yet, and I think we probably should, is Sharon Farrell. Her performance as Lenore, because she is, as you said, it becomes Frank's story. Like, it very much becomes about him and how this challenges his identity as a man, as a father, as a member of the community. Like that becomes his biggest concern, is like, how is this going to reflect on me, and what effect will it have on me? But Lenore, much sooner than Frank, comes around to the idea of right or wrong, this is my child, and it loves me unconditionally, and I have to love it back. I love the shot of like Frank looking in the freezer and seeing all the meat in there, and then he goes back later and it's like all the meat's gone and something's down in the basement. It's like, that's what's going on. But she has some wonderful kind of like off kilter moments where it feels dangerous, it feels inappropriate, it feels like not normal. And I love every little thing she does. It's just like she just makes some really great choices, and I think Larry Cohen gives her some great choices to do.
I'm glad you brought her up too, because that's something that for me, it wasn't the meat, it was the milk. Because in addition to, I'm assuming they had some kind of a sponsorship deal, because there's a Carnation milk truck that is all about the Carnation milk truck. Even when the driver is getting slaughtered, you can still see the nice logo on the back. But the Davis family has like an inordinate amount of milk delivered to them. And at one point, Frank notices, oh, there's like 5 empty milk glass bottles sitting down by the door. So he knows that his son, Chris, has been staying with a friend named Charlie for, since this whole thing happened. They're trying to keep him in the dark, keep him away from the news, that kind of thing, which is its own kind of admirable subplot. But he's like, okay, I haven't drank this much milk. My wife hasn't. Chris isn't home. So has the baby been drinking the milk? And immediately I'm thinking, is this sloppy screenwriting? Because this thing is not articulate enough to twist the cap off of anything and drink it. It would, if anything, be smashing the bottles. But then you see Lenore acting all strange. She's like, oh, sit down and watch this movie. It's got Paul Newman in it. And and then she's watching cartoons, and you're thinking, okay, she's gone around the bend.
Right.
But after the movie was over, we see how it plays out. I don't think she's gone insane. I think she's trying to lull Frank into a sense of like, let's watch TV, let's talk. I've got something in the basement.
Yeah, right. And really, I think it's about like, how can I bring him back into the family? Because the family, what she wants is for the family to come back together. She wants Chris to come home. She wants this baby to be part of their family, and she wants her husband back.
And I think the cool thing is, I think there are other versions of this movie where she is so wrapped up in that fantasy, that idea of keeping the family together, even if it's a monster, that she loses her mind once the baby dies at the end. And she's like, you killed my son. And she's gone insane. But no, she takes it very well, I think, kind of accepting that, it was never going to work out, but at least, again, she's got her husband. She can go home to Chris, and they can, rebuild things and maybe try again, not with those drugs.
And I do love the moments she has of just kind of like hysterical laughter that just cuts off. And you're like, because again, you think based on her behavior that she's losing it. But I think there is something about it where she's like, how do I do this? How do I move forward with this new normal? If this is going to be the new normal, how is that even going to work?
And I love that there is that nuance in, a mid-70s horror film, something you could easily write off. I mean,
you don't need any of that. Like, you could just have a straightforward, cardboard characters of like hysterical women. And,
I was just going to say, like, Larry Cohen writing the hysterical housewife part, but not as but there's more to it. There's more degrees to it, right?
Yeah.
Making her a full flesh and blood character that immediately recalls the opening 10 minutes of this film, where it's this loving family kind of going through all of this again with the excitement and the jitters and the kind of the laughs. And by the time this movie goes to black, regardless of the cheesy sequel setup, I feel like I know this family and I'm rooting for them. It's
Yeah.
not that, oh, here we go again. Here's another one. Or, wow, that sucks that half the family died. It's like, no, they're together and I wish the best for them.
Well, and I think we are kind of rooting for the baby at the end in some ways.
Yes.
We're like, I want this. This monster did not ask to be a monster. It didn't ask to be created this way. It certainly didn't ask to be like hunted down. It just wants to live and it wants its parents. And it's kind of like, by the end, you actually generate some genuine sympathy for this monster. And it's like, that for me is kind of the gift of a horror film, is that you can, if you get to where you care about the menace, and yet you realize it's still a menace and it probably has to go away.
Yeah. And also going back to Alien, I heard some not theories, but just some ideas recently about the monster. Very much like the creature in It's Alive, it's birthed in a situation it didn't kind of ask to be, and all of a sudden there's these people, these other creatures hunting it. It just wants to be
Right.
left alone.
Right. Right.
and
Right.
and
Right.
it goes on its killing spree when there's people poking at it or prodding at it or trying to flush it out into space. So yeah, it's a complete innocent. It's surviving strictly on instinct. Yeah, sharp movie. I was very happily surprised. While I shouldn't have been surprised because I dig Larry Cohen stuff.
Yeah. I also wanted to, like, there's I think a parallel, I think a conscious one, a callback, if you will, to the 1954 giant ant movie, Them, because that's where we have, that takes place in the LA sewers. Like the climax takes place there as well. So you're chasing, you're having those catacomb like shots where there's flashlights and people, poking around. You don't know where the creature's going to jump out. And, of course we would see the LA storm system gets put on full display in Terminator 2 and Grease, so for me, it's just always a fun place to visit. I think it's a great location.
Yeah, and there's that one shot where the cops are down there, and there's the red kind of the cherry on top of the cop car, creating this bizarre strobe effect. And of course, I mean, we've seen this 1,000 times. I don't know if it was new when this movie came out, but it's very effective. You see the cops, where is it? They're looking around, and then all of a sudden you cut to, oh, it's a flash of red, and it's the baby on the floor. Like, oh,
Yeah.
they're in danger.
Yeah.
I also appreciated the baby's vision, which is kind of like when you take off the 3D glasses in the middle of a movie and everything is
Yes.
just kind of wavy.
Yeah. I love the baby cam. I think I just was watching a werewolf movie, and, I love how, like, when you see it through the eyes of the monster and you see that the monster doesn't see the way we do, unlike a slasher movie where it just becomes a camera POV, like there's an actual a literally different lens that we're looking through.
Yeah, all great stuff. Well, thank you, AC. I think we've pretty much covered It's Alive, unless there's any stone that you think we've left unturned.
I don't think so. I recommend it. I think, again, as I was watching, I was like, there's not as much monster action as I recalled. So I think if you go in with those expectations managed, it'll be a better experience for you. And I think Cohen gives you enough real characters that you can invest in, that kind of makes it easier to follow, as opposed to just waiting for the next monster moment.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, the moments where they have the kills, like there's the lady in the go-go boots, there's the random guy that we just see kind of laying in the alley. When we cut away to that, and even the carnation milk guy, I'm thinking, I get it, but I want to get back to what's going on with Frank and Lenore.
Isn't that funny? Yep.
Yeah.
We're growing up, I think, Ian.
Boo.
I know.
All right. Well, we're gonna leave it there, folks. So thanks for hanging out and watching us talk about It's Alive. What did you think of It's Alive? Is it great? Is it Have you seen it? Have you not? Hopefully, if you haven't seen it, you turn this off way before you get on to spoilers because it's very worthwhile. But drop us a comment. Let us know what you think. And while you're down there in the box below, be sure and check out AC's blog post regarding this year's Scare-a-Thon. And also be sure to support RAP if you are predisposed, moved to do so. That's the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project, going strong for the 3rd year. Also, I'm going to leave a link to my interview, audio only, with Larry Cohen, because that predates the podcast. That's how old we're talking about.
That's wild.
But yeah, and in general, support AC all through this laborious, long month of watching horror movies. Yeah, let's make this a record Scare-a-Thon for the books. Bigger and better every year. So AC, thank you very much for hanging out. We're going to be talking again very soon. We're going to go back to Hammerland. We're going to return to Hammerland for another Hammer film. And here's a teaser. We got some not so flattering comments on our last video that I want to address with you. Wow. But we'll dig into that for sure. But folks out there, if you like this, please like and subscribe and all that good business. And check us out here on Kicking the Seat and also Horror 101 with Dr. AC. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much and take care.